We can control only one thing. The fact is, we can't control everything that happens to us. We can't control where our ancestors came from, who will win the Super Bowl, how much tuition will be next fall, or how others might treat us. But there's one thing we can control, how we respond to what happens to us, and that is what counts. This is why we need to stop worrying about things we can't control and start worrying about things we can. Picture two circles. The inner circle is our circle of control. It includes things we have control over: ourselves, our attitudes, our choices, our response to whatever happens to us. Surrounding the circle of control is the circle of no control. It includes the thousands of things we can't do anything about. Now, what will happen if we spend our time and energy worrying about things we can't control, like a rude comment, a past mistake, or the fact that it's raining on a good hair day? You guessed it. We'll feel even more out of control, as if we were the victims. For instance, if your sister annoys you and you're always complaining about her weaknesses, something you have control over, that won't do anything to fix the problem. It'll only cause you to blame your problems on her and lose power yourself. Ignore the rude comment. Avoid making the mistake next time, and get an umbrella for the rain. You are the star of your own life. Focus on what you can influence. Circle of no control: the color of your skin, the weather, past mistakes, the cost of tuition, your parents, rude comments, your location of your birth, who will win the NBA finals. We can only control ourselves, our attitudes, our choices. Renata told me a story that illustrates this point. A week before her upcoming volleyball game, she learned that the mother of a player on the opposing team had made fun of Renata's volleyball skills. Instead of ignoring the comments, Renata became angry and spent the rest of the week stewing. When the game arrived, her only goal was to prove to this woman that she was a good player. To make a long story short, Renata played poorly, spent much of her time on the bench, and her team lost the game. She was so focused on something she couldn't control, a stranger's opinion of her, that she lost control of the only thing she could control, herself. Proactive people, on the other hand, focus elsewhere, on the things they can control. By doing so, they experience inner peace and are primed for whatever comes their way. They learn to live with the many things they can't do anything about, even to smile and laugh about them. They may not like them, but they know it's no use worrying. Turning setbacks into triumphs. Life often deals us a bad hand, but it's up to you to think to yourself, "I've got this. I can get through it." By the way, think of how boring you'd be if nothing challenging ever happened to you. You'd never learn, and then you'd never change. Every setback is an opportunity for us to turn it into triumph. As this account by Brad Lemley from Parade Magazine illustrates, it's not what happens to you in life, it's what you do about it, says W. Mitchell, a self-made millionaire, a sought-after speaker, a former mayor, a river rafter, and skydiver, and he accomplished all this after his accidents. If you saw Mitchell, you'd find this hard to believe. You see, this guy's face is a patchwork of multicolored skin grafts. The fingers of both his hands are either missing or mere stubs, and his paralyzed legs lie thin and useless under his slacks. Mitchell says sometimes people try to guess how he was injured. A car wreck? Vietnam? The real story is more astounding than one could ever imagine. On June 19, 1971, he was on top of the world, young, healthy, and popular. The day before, he had bought a beautiful new motorcycle. That morning, he soloed an airplane for the first time. That afternoon, I got on that motorcycle to ride to work, he recalls, and at an intersection, a laundry truck and I collided. The bike went down, crushed my elbow, and fractured my pelvis, and the gas can popped open on the motorcycle. The gas poured out, the heat of the engine ignited it, and I got burned over 65% of my body. Fortunately, a quick-thinking man in a nearby car lot doused Mitchell with a fire extinguisher and saved his life. Even so, Mitchell's face had been burned off. His fingers were black, charred, and twisted. His legs were nothing but raw red flesh. It was common for first-time visitors to look at him and faint. He was unconscious for 2 weeks, and then he awakened. Over 4 months, he had 13 transfusions, 16 skin graft operations, and several other surgeries. 4 years later, after spending months in rehabilitation and years learning to adapt to his new handicaps, the unthinkable happened. Mitchell was involved in a freak airplane crash, and he was paralyzed from the waist down. When I tell people there were two separate accidents, he says they can hardly stand it. After his paralyzing plane crash accident, Mitchell recalls meeting a 19-year-old patient in the hospital's gymnasium. This guy had also been paralyzed. He had been a mountain climber, a skier, an active outdoors person, and he was convinced his life was over. Finally, I went over to this guy and said, "You know something? Before all this happened to me, there were 10,000 things I could do. Now there are 9,000. I could spend the rest of my life dwelling on the 1,000 I lost, but I choose to focus on the 9,000 that are left." Mitchell says his secret is twofold. First is the love and encouragement of friends and family, and second is a personal philosophy he has gleaned from various sources. He realized he did not have to buy into society's notion that one must be handsome and healthy to be happy. "I'm in charge of my own spaceship," he states emphatically. "It is my up, my down. I could choose to see this situation as a setback or a starting point." I like how Helen Keller put it. "So much has been given to me. I have no time to ponder that which was denied." Although most of our setbacks won't be as severe as Mitchell's, all of us will have our fair share. You might get dumped, you might lose in an election at school, you might get beaten up, and you may not get accepted to the school of your choice. You may become seriously ill. I hope and believe that you'll be proactive and strong in these defining moments. I remember a major setback of my own. 2 years after I had become the starting quarterback in college, I seriously injured my knee. I had surgery, fell behind, and subsequently lost my position. Coach called me into his office just before the season began and told me they were handing the starting job to someone else. I felt sick. I'd worked my whole life to get to this position. It was my senior year. This wasn't supposed to happen. As a backup, I had a choice to make. I could complain, badmouth the new guy, and feel sorry for myself. Or I could make the most of the situation. Luckily, I decided to deal with it. I was no longer throwing touchdowns, but I could help in other ways. So I swallowed my pride and kept supporting the team, working hard and preparing for each game as if I were the starter. I chose to keep my chin up. Was it easy? Not at all. I often felt like a failure. Sitting out every game after being the starter was humiliating. Keeping a good attitude was a constant struggle. Was it the right choice, though? Definitely. I wore out my bum on the bench all year, but I contributed to the team in other ways by supporting the new guy and helping to prepare our defense each week for the opposing team's offense. Most important, I took responsibility for my attitude. I cannot begin to tell you what a positive difference this singular decision made on my life. Rising above abuse. One of the most intense and difficult setbacks of all is coping with abuse. I'll never forget the morning I spent with a group of teens, mostly young women, but also some young men who had been sexually abused as children, were victims of date rape, or were otherwise abused emotionally or physically. Heather told me this story. "I was sexually abused at 14. It happened when I was at a fair. A boy from school came up to me and said, 'I really need to talk to you. Come with me for a few minutes.' I never suspected anything because this kid was my friend and had always been really nice to me. He took me on a long walk and we ended up down at the dugouts at the high school. That was where he raped me. He kept telling me, 'If you tell anyone, no one will believe you. You wanted this to happen to you anyway.' He also told me that my parents would be ashamed of me. I kept quiet about it for 2 years. Finally, I was attending a help session where people who were abused told their stories, and this one girl got up and told a story similar to mine. When she said the name of the boy that abused her, I started to cry because it was the same one who had raped me. It turned out there were 6 of us who were victimized by him. Fortunately, Heather is now on the road to recovery and has found tremendous strength in being part of a teen group that is trying to help other abuse victims. By coming forward, she put a stop to more girls getting attacked by the same boy. That is a proactive and powerful act. Bridget's story, unfortunately, is very common. At the age of 5, I was sexually abused by a family member. Too afraid to tell anyone, I tried to bury my hurt and anger. Now that I've come to terms with what happened, I look back on my life and can see how it has affected everything. In trying to hide something terrible, I ended up hiding myself. It wasn't until 13 years later that I finally confronted my childhood nightmare. Many people have been through the same experience as I have, or something that is related. Most hide it. Why? Some are afraid for their lives. Others want to protect themselves or someone else. But whatever the reason, hiding it isn't the only answer. It only leaves a cut so deep in the soul that it seems that there's no way of healing it. Confronting it is the only way to sew up that bleeding gash. Find someone to talk to, someone you feel comfortable with, someone you can trust. It is a long and difficult process, but once you come to terms with it, it's only then that you can start to live. If you've been abused, it's never your fault, and the truth has to be told. Abuse thrives in secrecy. By telling another person, you immediately lighten the load you carry. Talk with a loved one or a friend you can trust. Go to sexual abuse support meetings or visit a professional therapist. If the first person you share your troubles with isn't receptive, don't give up. Keep sharing until you find someone who is. Sharing your secret with another is an important step in the healing process. Take the initiative to do it. You don't need to live with this burden for one day longer. Please refer to the abuse hotlines listed in the back of the book or the help session.